In this video, we will delve deeper into the topic of meditation and its connection with stress management. In the last video that I made on the topic, I mentioned how our thoughts, behavior, and emotions are intricately linked with each other. So, if we want to manage our emotions better, the best way is to manage our behavior and manage our thoughts. If we have the right kind of thoughts and if we are engaging in the right kinds of behaviors, we will be experiencing more positive emotion and less negative emotion. The problem is managing behavior is relatively easy. We can consciously try to engage in the right kinds of behaviors that have a positive impact on emotion. But managing our thoughts is something that most people have difficulties with. If you are having any negative thought, it becomes difficult to get rid of it. We continue to ruminate over it, which then has, of course, a major impact on our overall life satisfaction. So while the advice of not engaging in those negative thoughts is easy, it's easy to say don't worry, but it becomes difficult to practically not engage in those thoughts. There is a long line of research that shows that negative thoughts are many times more powerful than positive thoughts. So if negative thoughts take home in our minds, in our brains, then it becomes difficult to get rid of them. And they then have a major impact on our well-being. That is the reason I mentioned that we use meditation as a technique to gain control back over our conscious thinking process. So I mentioned that meditation is a process of strengthening the conscious thought process circuit so that we are consciously being able to choose the right kinds of thoughts and consciously not engage in those negative thoughts that make us unhappy. I compared this with the different regions of the brain. In a person who is stressed, either temporarily in an acute state of stress or chronically stressed, it is the limbic system, the emotional part of the brain, that is having control over the prefrontal cortex, which is the conscious part of our brain, the rational thinking part of our brain. What we ideally want is that our conscious part of the brain, the rational thinking part of the brain, controlling the emotional part of the brain. And this is essentially what we try to achieve through the process of meditation. We can think of meditation then as a form of brain exercise where we are working out to strengthen the metaphorical muscles of the brain. I'm saying metaphorical because the brain, of course, doesn't have muscle fibers. It has the neurons, the nerve cells. But we are strengthening the nerve cells, especially in the prefrontal cortex region of the brain, so that it continues to retain control over the remaining parts of the brain. And through that process, our overall emotional health and for that matter, even physical health. So how exactly do we exercise our brain? This brings us to the topic of mindfulness. When we are talking about mindfulness, we are not saying that our mind should be filled or should be full of thoughts. Because typically when it comes to thoughts, we are filled with a lot of negative thoughts. We are worrying about things. We engage in a lot of self-referential thinking. We tend to also fantasize about future. That is not what we are referring to when we are talking about mindfulness. Rather, when we are saying mindfulness, we are saying being fully present in the present. As we can see in this picture, the dog is fully present. The dog is enjoying the scenery, whereas the person is not fully present. Why? Because he is preoccupied with a lot of thoughts. So that is the reason he is not being able to fully enjoy the scenery that is in front of him. The problem of not being fully present is illustrated really well in this cartoon. As you can see, the guy is not fully present when he's working. He's fantasizing about some golf game that he could be playing. But when he's playing his golf game, he's fantasizing about some amorous activity instead of being fully present in the game. And while he is engaging in the amorous activity, again, he is not fully present. He is worrying about his work, for instance. So, because of this, because of not being fully present in any of the situations, he is not being able to live his life fully, wholeheartedly. He is not being able to enjoy his life to the optimum. In the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, this is called the monkey mind. The way a monkey jumps from one branch to the other, similarly, our mind is also jumping from one thought to the other. It is never fully present. And that is a problem. Moving from spiritual terminology to modern neuroscience terminology, this is called the default mode network. And what do we mean by default mode network? It is the baseline activity that is happening in our brain all the time, even when the brain is not consciously focused on any particular activity. For example, if I am working on solving a mathematics problem, the regions in the brain that is responsible for solving mathematical problems will be more active. And we can actually see that through neuroimaging technology. What happens is that wherever there is a lot of activity happening in the brain, it needs a lot of energy. So more blood flow happens to those regions. And this can easily be then detected through magnetic resonance imaging, MRI kind of studies. So coming back to default mode network, we see that in majority of the human beings, there are certain regions of the brain which is always active. It is like our car always running. So what are those regions? It is the PCC, which is the posterior cingulate cortex, MPFC, which is the medial prefrontal cortex. Then we have the amygdala and hippocampus. Amygdala, you know, is responsible for detecting emotions, especially it is the part of the brain that is responsible for processing most of the negative emotions. It does influence positive emotions, but primarily a lot of this negative fear, anxiety, anger kinds of emotions. Hippocampus, again, you know, it is to do with processing of memories. And most of our memories tend to have a lot of emotional color associated with it. So when we are ruminating over the past, especially we are talking about a lot of emotional past. So hippocampus is also the region. And the PCC, MPFC, these are more in the cortical region, but they tend to process all this emotional information. So when we are talking about default mode network, this is the parts of the brain that is constantly active. What happens during meditation is that if you are good at meditation, you deactivate the default mode network. In other words, you decrease the level of activity that is otherwise constantly happening in your brain. In more practical terms, this means you are not daydreaming anymore. You are not just phasing out. You are not ruminating over your past. You are not fantasizing about some pleasant scenario. Rather, you are fully present. Now, why is it important to deactivate the default mode network? It is important because an active default mode network is strongly associated with unhappiness. So in default mode network, we are mostly thinking about our own selves, self-referential thinking. Even when we are thinking about others or something else, it is in connection, in relation with us. So if I'm thinking about my friend, I'm thinking in connection with me. Why has he not uh, given a like to my post on Facebook? Similar kind of thinking. Okay. So it is very narcissistic, and consequently it is strongly associated with negative emotions like depression. A active default mode network is also associated with addictive personalities, OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. And other big problem with having a very active default mode network is that you find it difficult to pay attention. And this should be obvious, right? Because your mind is wandering, you are not being able to focus. So when your mind is constantly active, you may end up not being able to perform well, primarily because you are not being able to focus well. So a very active default mode network is common amongst those suffering from ADHD. It becomes difficult to form quality memory because, again, you are not being able to focus. So in meditation, we learn how to reduce the activity in the default mode network. You can see in this figure how those who are advanced meditators, activity levels in the default mode network decreases compared to naive meditators, where activity level in the default mode network continues to stay high. Irrespective of the types of meditation that these advanced meditators are engaging in, the activity level in the default mode network is decreasing, which essentially means more happiness. Now, I'm not very fond of the term meditation because it gives the illusion that there is just one way of meditating, which actually isn't the case. In the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, there are many different types of meditation. Each has a different name. Each of these meditation techniques have some unique benefits, some benefits that are general, but there are a lot of unique benefits that you may accrue from different types of meditations. I personally don't know all of these techniques either, but it is important that you at least are aware of the varied kinds of meditation techniques that are available. So we will be quickly going through some of these most well-known meditation techniques from these Eastern traditions. You may have heard of the third eye, which is especially the region between our eyebrows. So one of the meditation techniques is focusing our attention on the third eye, which is called the Agnya Chakra. There is also the chakra meditation, because third eye is not the only energy center. There are many energy centers throughout our body. And in chakra meditation, you focus your attention on the different energy centers and progressively move your attention from one energy center to the other. Kundalini meditation is a similar practice. It's a more forceful practice, and very advanced technique. You should not be trying it, just learning it from YouTube, for instance, because it can be problematic if you don't do it exactly right. There is Kriya Yoga, which was especially popularized by Paramahansa Yogananda. It involves, again, many techniques and focuses on breath, your energy centers. All these techniques are something that you should be learning under the guidance of a trained yogi. Another meditation technique is called the gazing meditation. The terms that I'm using are more English terms, but the Hindu word would be trataka, so gazing. Now, what do you gaze at? You may gaze at a candle, you may gaze at some image, or I don't know if you can see in the video, but like for instance, the mandala or tantra kind of figures. And you are not gazing the entire time. You gaze for a certain amount of time and then you close your eyes, try to keep that same image in your mind even when you are not physically looking at that object. So it is great for concentration, enhancing your visualization capabilities, along with the other generic benefits that come from any type of meditation. From visual mode, we can go into the sound mode. There are many sound based meditation techniques. The transcendental meditation, which you may have heard of, which was popularized by Mahesh Yogi in the US, is one such meditation technique where you recite a mantra. Om is the most common mantra, but it need not be Om. There are many other sounds that you or many other mantras that you may be reciting in your mind, either audibly or sometimes inaudibly in your mind. It could be as simple as listening to certain sounds and paying careful attention to those sounds as well. Very powerful technique which can easily take you into a state of trance. But again, you should be trying these techniques, as I will constantly emphasize, under the guidance of a trained person. There are many tantric meditations. Now, the word tantra is often associated with some exotic sex activities. That's wrong, actually. Tantra technically means technology. So, in the tantric traditions, there are many. Just within the tantric traditions, there are many meditation techniques. The book Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, for instance, talks about 108 different kinds of meditation techniques. One of them is Shunyata meditation, which is focusing your attention on emptiness, which is Shunyata meditation is also a part of the Buddhist tradition. In the Buddhist tradition, there is also something called the Vipassana meditation technique, where you scan your entire body. I have been trained in the Vipassana meditation technique. I will not teach it to you because, again, I want you to learn it under proper guidance, not just over some video. But I will teach you compassion meditation, which is called metta meditation in the Buddhist tradition, where you deliberately create emotions of love and kindness. I will teach it a little later, not today. Today, I'm going to teach you Anapana, which is the breath meditation, where you are focusing your attention on these sensations of breathing in and breathing out. In all these techniques that I briefly touched upon, there is one word that came up again and again. And that word was focusing. Focusing one's attention on something. Now, what you focus your attention on, that varied from one meditation technique to the other. Sometimes you focus on a mantra, sometimes you focus on an image, sometimes on your breath, sometimes on certain energy centers in the body, sometimes on sound. Nevertheless, it is always about focusing one's attention on something. In other words, it is about being present fully on the object of attention and not let our mind wander. This is what is mindfulness, which I had touched upon briefly before. But what does mindfulness mean from a very operational standpoint? In other words, how do we achieve that state of mindfulness where we are fully present and where our mind is not wandering? How do we achieve that? That can be done through a 3-step process. The first step is deciding on what it is that we want to focus our attention on and consciously, intentionally focusing our attention on that particular object. In the meditation technique that I'm going to teach you, this is going to be breath. So we will be focusing attention on our breath intentionally. So when I breathe in, actually I can feel the air going through my nostrils. When I breathe out, I can feel the sensations of the air going out of my nostrils. So that is what I focus my attention on. It's a very intentional process. So that is the reason I've highlighted the word intentional here. What is the second process? Second step rather? It is detecting when our mind has wandered off. So as I am trying to focus my attention on my breath, I will realize at some point of time that my attention is not on my breath anymore, that my attention has wandered off somewhere else. Maybe I'm thinking about, oh, what am I going to eat for lunch? Or maybe I'm thinking about why did my friend not reply to my email so far, whatever it is. Or I may start fantasizing about some great ice cream that I could have, whatever it is. There will be a point when the mind will wander off, and it is not on the object on which I was supposed to focus my attention, which in this case was breath. So detecting when the mind has wandered off, that is what we are talking about. That is the second step. Detecting the instance where mind has wandered off. We may detect a little later. Our mind may have wandered off at, let's say, 1 minute 23 seconds. But we may realize that our mind has wandered off maybe at 2 minutes 10 seconds. So it may not happen instantly. But with practice, we may realize the detection point earlier. In any case, it is about staying alert and being aware of when our mind has wandered off. So this is about, again, staying focused. When our mind wanders off, it is about bringing the attention back to the present, which in this case is our breath. The last step is to bring the attention back with a unique kind of attitude, with a non-judgmental attitude. So it is not cursing oneself. Oh, I can't even pay attention for a minute. My mind has wandered off. I'm such a horrible meditator. One should not be thinking that way. Rather, one needs to bring back the attention in a very gentle form, in a non-judgmental way. Almost like when a little child is walking off, you gently bring back the child to the present, to where the child is safe, without getting angry at oneself, without being mad at oneself. Rather, seeing it as an opportunity for bettering one's attention skills. So this reorientation of attention to the present is essentially what is developing our executive control, the prefrontal cortex part of the brain where we are having executive control. So we try to focus our attention. When it drifts, we stay alert to that, and then we bring back the attention in a very gentle manner. This non-judgmental bringing back the attention in a gentle manner is important, because then we are not processing things in a very negative, judgmental, emotional way. We are bringing it in a very positive way. We are seeing this as an open opportunity for developing our mindfulness abilities. So this is the basic steps in any meditation process. Now, depending on the specific types of meditation, one can go into many other sub techniques, but overall, across almost all the meditation techniques, this is what is common. Now, let me quickly mention why I chose breath as the object of attention. Two reasons. One, breath has no religion. Now, some of you may be very religious people, some of you may be atheists. But if you are a religious person, you may not want to focus your attention on the religious symbol of some other religions, or you may not want to utter mantras from other religious traditions. An atheist similarly may not want to do that. But we all breathe. Our breath doesn't have any religion. So, this is something common to the entire humanity, all animals. So, it is much more accessible. But the second reason, and much more important reason, why breath is important, why focusing attention on one's breath is important, is going back to this figure. Breath happens at all the three levels. It happens at the hindbrain level. In other words, we don't have to consciously think to breathe. The breathing happens automatically. If we had to always think to breathe, then we would all be long dead, because our mind would have wandered off somewhere else and now we are not breathing and we would be dead, right? So breathing happens at a hindbrain level. Breathing also happens at a limbic system level, the emotional level, when our emotions change, when we are excited, when we are angry, when we are anxious, when we are depressed, our breathing patterns change. So breathing operates also at the limbic system level. Lastly, breathing also happens at a neocortex level, at a conscious awareness level. We can consciously choose to breathe a certain way. All breathing exercises is about consciously breathing in a certain way or holding our breath. I may decide to breathe in for 5 seconds, hold my breath for 10 seconds, and breathe out for 20 seconds, and so on and so forth. This is something that I may consciously manipulate. I may decide to breathe heavily or slowly, gently. So breathing is something that operates at all the three levels. So when we use breathing as the vehicle for meditation, initially we try to control our breath from a conscious part of our brain. Over time, because breathing spans all the three levels, it becomes easier for us to gain control also of our limbic system. And if we are a super advanced meditator, like an Olympic athlete level meditator who has had 50s, 60s, 1,000 hours of meditation practice, we can even control our hindbrain activity through meditation. Going back to the three steps that I mentioned in meditation. Number one, intentionally focusing our attention on something, in this case, our breath. Second was staying alert to our mind wandering, which is staying present focused. And third was reorienting our attention when our mind has already wandered off, and doing it in a non-judgmental way. We can see this at a neurological level also if we look at the scans of the brain at different points of time. In this diagram, you can see that when we are sustaining our attention on the object of our meditation, which in our case was breath, we see more activity in the prefrontal cortex region of the brain. That is the executive center of the brain. And we can easily see more activity in that part of the brain because that is the part of the brain that receives more blood flow, which then is easily detected on scans. When our attention wanders off, in other words, when it is not anymore on our breath and we are now daydreaming, that is when the default mode network is active. So we see more activity in the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate region, which we have already discussed, is the part that stays active when our mind is wandering. So again, our mind wandering can easily be detected through brain scans. Now, when we detect that our mind has wandered off, we see more activity in the insular region of the brain. That is the part that is responsible for conscious awareness. Then finally, when we are deliberately bringing attention back to our breath, we again reactivate the prefrontal cortex region as well as the parietal region, which is all about executive control. So when you meditate over and over again on a daily basis, you are essentially strengthening these regions of the brain. There is a common saying in neuroscience: neurons that fire together wire together. So we actually see increased gray matter in these regions of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the insula, the parietal lobe, because of regular, constant, or regular meditation. Now, this graph is a great illustration of how meditation helps enhance our focusing, our concentration abilities, how it enhances our mindfulness, meaning the ability to stay focused on the present. This is the brain patterns that we see for a novice meditator. On the x-axis is the time that is spent in meditation session. On the y-axis, we are seeing the percentage change that is happening in the activity levels of the default mode network. So the red spikes that you see, that shows increase activity in the default mode network, or in other words, more mind wandering, which is associated with activities in the posterior cingulate and medial prefrontal cortex. So whenever those regions of the brain is seeing more activity, it is directly correlated with those red lines. Those blue bars, that is, we are seeing less activity in those regions. So what do we see in a non-meditator's brain? We see that his mind wanders off easily. He finds it difficult to keep his mind focused for sustained amount of time. So the first part of the graph is the first meditation session. The second part of the graph actually is the fourth meditation session in a row. And by the fourth session, this guy has real difficulty concentrating. His mind wanders off much more than stays focused on the breath. But what do we see in the brain of an experienced meditator? We see just the opposite. We see initially it takes maybe a couple of minutes for the meditator's mind to settle in. So initially there is a little bit of mind wandering, which is shown in those initial red spikes. But then activity in the default mode network decreases and it stays there. By the fourth session, he or these people easily get into the meditative mode. Their mind doesn't wander off at all. So this is a great ability to have. You are being able to stay focused and your mind doesn't wander. This actually has physical effects on the brain. So the regions of the brain that is associated with executive function, that is associated with focusing, with alertness, with enhanced memory, all those regions we see increased amount of gray matter. There are several studies here. I've listed a few. The graph here also shows increased gray matter in the hippocampus region. And we see the opposite effect in amygdala, the region which is associated with fear and anger. So in the graph, you can see the extent of gray matter decreases. Now, this does not mean that you fail to sense danger anymore. In fact, your brain continues to stay sensitive. In fact, it is much more sensitive because all that extra chatter in the brain that was happening because of your mind wandering, because of all the extra activity in the default mode network, is not happening anymore. So it becomes easy for the brain to detect emotions. You become actually much better, especially with respect to emotional intelligence, where you can easily detect emotions in others. But your reactivity decreases. So you don't react automatically to somebody's negative emotions. So essentially a great ability to have when it comes to managing your own emotions. And for that matter, when managing other people's emotions. Because when you easily react to other people's emotions, what happens? Things escalate in a negative way. Many studies have been done on meditation's effect on the immune system. And here we see clearly how meditation has a very positive effect on the immune system. There have been many studies. Meditation decreases pain sensitivity, for instance. There are a whole host of benefits that come from meditation. It's going to take me too much of time to enumerate all of those, but here are some quick list of benefits, especially related to the broad area of stress management. Sustained attention. You can sustain your attention for longer periods of time, and you can attend also much deeper. You will be much better at concentrating. You become better at handling stress. Resilience. You bounce back from any kind of adversity, any kind of stressful situations better. You become much more empathetic person, much more compassionate person. Actually, compassionate person would be even more accurate. I will talk about those differences later on. You are happier, well-being. Your negative emotions go down. As I was mentioning before, you become more emotionally intelligent. Especially when it comes to leadership, that's a great quality to have. Higher emotional intelligence. Those who have taken my leadership classes know how big a factor that is. You become more curious, you become more creative, you become much better at handling conflict, better at interpersonal communication. Lot of the stresses that happen are because of relationship issues. So you become much better at handling interpersonal conflict and better at communications. Now I will lead you through a guided meditation. I will not make it too long, maybe about a couple of minutes in interest of time. But when you are practicing meditation on your own, you try to do it for 10 minutes initially. Later on, you can increase it to half an hour, 1 hour. You become an expert, you can do it for hours together. But before I guide you through the meditation process, here are some of the important prerequisites for a good meditation session. Number one, your posture. You should have an erect posture. You should not be stiff. In fact, you should be comfortable. But it is important that you are sitting erect. You don't have to sit cross-legged like a yogi. If you can, awesome. But if you cannot, you can sit on a hard chair with soft cushion, but not on a sofa where you become too comfortable and drift off to sleep. Remember, meditation is about staying alert to our mind wandering. We don't want to drift off to sleep. Second important point is finding a quiet place. You meditate in a quiet environment. If you are an expert meditator, you can meditate anywhere. Loud, distracting environment won't bother you. But for novice meditators, when you are starting out to meditate, it is extremely important that you choose a quiet place. Already our mind gets easily distracted, even without external distractions. So at least we need to remove all external distractions and we need to sit in a quiet place. The third important point to keep in mind is when do you meditate? The time factor. In the Hindu, Buddhist traditions, the early morning, dawn, and dusk, those are considered the best times to meditate. Whether you choose those times or not doesn't matter. There are certain additional benefits, additional spiritual benefits if you meditate during those hours. But You can practically meditate anytime, whenever you get time is what I would rather say. Ideally, though, those times are better. But important thing to keep in mind is to try to meditate the same time and in the same place on a regular basis. That is what is going to help you get into the habit of meditation. If one day you are meditating at noon, at another day you are meditating in the evening, then it becomes difficult to develop the habit and sustain the habit for a long period of time. It is also recommended in the Eastern traditions that you take a shower because it freshens you up and it cools down your body as well, which then also helps with your attention. But it is again not required. It's better to do some more meditation than do a perfect meditation, is what I would say. But other few things are very important. For example, you should avoid trying to meditate after having a heavy meal because it's going to make you drowsy. You will have difficulty focusing attention. All your resources are going to the stomach to help digest the food. So you don't have enough resources in the brain for this alert meditation process. Same logic applies then with respect to being too tired. So after a long, hard day's work, probably not the best time to try out learning meditation. So if that's the case, take a short nap and then maybe after you feel rested, that's when you try meditation. Anyway, that's enough about meditation. Now let me guide you through the process of meditation. I would like you to all sit erect, close your eyes. I want you to take your attention to your breath. I don't want you to be thinking about breath. I don't want you to be pontificating about breathing. I just want you to take your attention to the sensation of breathing. In other words, as you are breathing in, you should be able to feel the sensation of that cold air going through your nostrils. And as you are breathing out, you should be able to feel the sensation of that warm air leaving your body. So you pay attention to the sensation of breath. And this is what you do over and over and over again, focusing all your attention on that sensation of air flowing in through your nostrils and air flowing out of your nostrils. In a matter of few seconds or few minutes, you will realize that you are not paying attention to your breath anymore. You will realize that your mind has wandered off somewhere else. The moment you detect that, very gently bring your attention back to your breath. Don't curse yourself for not being able to sustain attention. Because remember, when you bring back the attention to your breath, it actually activates the prefrontal cortex region. So it is actually strengthening your prefrontal cortex region. So bringing back the attention is part of the meditation practice. So it is nothing to feel bad about. As many times your attention drifts away, that many times you bring the attention back to your breath. The moment you notice your attention has wandered off, you bring back the attention to your breath. And this is what you do for the next 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, howsoever long you can do it, that will be great. And if you practice this on a regular basis, the benefits will be immense. I hope you incorporate this practice into your daily lives.